What happens when a prejudiced cop arrests the wrong person, someone with the power to bring his career to an abrupt end? Officer Jake Thompson was no stranger to the quiet backroads of his precinct. Known for his abrasive attitude and a penchant for control, Thompson often looked for opportunities to assert his authority. On a slow evening, his eyes locked onto a sleek black sedan, cruising confidently down the road. Behind the wheel was a sharp-dressed man with an air of composure that instantly irritated Thompson. Flipping on his lights, Thompson muttered under his breath, "Let's see how confident he is now." The driver, a black man in a tailored suit, calmly complied, pulling over without hesitation. But his composed demeanor only fueled Thompson's annoyance. The officer leaned in, barking for a license and registration while fabricating a speeding charge. Despite the clear injustice, the driver remained unerringly calm. "You're making a mistake, officer," the man said coolly. Thompson sneered, snapping handcuffs on him without hesitation. "I'll decide what's a mistake," he growled, oblivious to the storm brewing just ahead. What Thompson didn't realize was that his reckless arrest wouldn't just change his career, it would make national headlines. The man he arrogantly detained wasn't just any driver. He was the state attorney general. The empty stretch of highway was quiet. The kind of night officer Jake Thompson despised. He craved action. Something to break the monotony. That's when he spotted a sleek black sedan gliding down the road. The driver exuding an air of self-assurance that made Thompson's blood boil. A black man in a perfectly tailored suit, looking far too composed for Thompson's liking. "Gotcha," he muttered, flipping on his lights and speeding after the car. The driver pulled over without hesitation. Thompson approached the vehicle, already concocting his story. He tapped on the window and barked, "License and registration." The man inside handed over his documents wordlessly, his expression calm but sharp. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked, his voice measured. "You were speeding," Thompson lied, his tone dripping with authority. The driver raised an eyebrow. "I was going 35 in a 40 zone." Thompson bristled at the response. He hated when they questioned him. Hated when they acted like equals. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, his hand resting on his cuffs. "On what grounds?" the man replied, still calm but now studying Thompson intently. "Don't make me use force," Thompson sneered. The man complied, stepping out of the car and placing his hands on the hood. "You're making a mistake, officer," he said. "Oh. I'll decide what's a mistake," Thompson spat, twisting the man's arm and snapping on the cuffs. But as he glanced at his detainee, an unease began to creep in. The man wasn't panicked. There was no anger, no fear, only an unnerving calm. Back at the precinct, Thompson walked his detainee in, relishing the moment. "Take a seat, boss," he said mockingly, pushing the man into the interrogation room. The silence unnerved him. Most people would be shouting, demanding a phone call. But not this one. He simply sat there, arms crossed, eyes cool and calculating. "What's your name?" Thompson asked, filling out paperwork. "James Carter," the man replied evenly. Thompson froze. The name rang a faint bell, but he dismissed it. "You think you're special?" he scoffed. Minutes later, a fellow officer entered. His face pale. "Thompson. Do you know who you just arrested?" Thompson frowned. "Some arrogant guy who thought he was above the law." The officer turned the computer screen toward him. There, staring back, was a government photo of James Carter. Beneath the title, State Attorney General. Thompson's smug grin evaporated as the shocking reality hit him like a freight train. The precinct was in chaos within hours of James Carter's arrest. Word spread like wildfire. By the time Officer Jake Thompson had processed his detainee, the precinct's parking lot was swarming with journalists. Cameras flashed incessantly, and reporters shouted questions, each vying for a statement. The arrest of a black man by a white officer wasn't just another story, it was a scandal. And when the world learned that man was the state attorney general, it became front-page news. Inside, tension crackled through the air. Officers whispered in clusters, throwing nervous glances toward the interrogation room. The station's leadership was in full panic mode. The precinct chief, visibly agitated, paced the hallways barking orders. "No comments to the press. Get legal on the line now." Jake Thompson, however, stood frozen. The weight of his mistake was sinking in. Every officer he passed avoided his gaze. The smug confidence he had carried earlier was gone, replaced with the cold grip of dread. He tried to rationalize, muttering under his breath, "I was just doing my job." But deep down, he knew no excuse could fix this. Meanwhile, James Carter sat calmly in the interrogation room, as though the chaos outside had no bearing on him. When the precinct chief finally entered and unlocked his cuffs, Carter simply adjusted his suit jacket and stood, his composure unshaken. Walking through the precinct's corridors, Carter's presence was commanding. His steady gaze met the nervous glances of officers, and not a word needed to be said. As he exited the building, flanked by the chief and the lieutenant, the cameras went wild. Reporters yelled over each other, desperate for a statement. But Carter paused only briefly. "Justice will speak," he said calmly before walking into the night, leaving behind a storm that was only just beginning. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. Journalists, activists, and curious onlookers crammed into the space, eager to witness the scandal unfold. Cameras clicked as the doors swung open, and James Carter entered, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. His composed demeanor silenced the room. He moved with purpose, taking his seat at the prosecution's table, his piercing gaze scanning the room with quiet authority. At the defense table sat Officer Jake Thompson, his face pale and tight with tension. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. 4 weeks. He had told himself that this was just a misunderstanding, that the system would protect him as it always had. But the murmurs of the spectators and the hard stares from the jury told a different story. "Court is now in session," the judge announced, stepping into the room. The room fell silent. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their evidence. The first exhibit was the arrest video. On the courtroom screen, Thompson was seen approaching Carter's car, his voice dripping with arrogance as he fabricated charges and demanded compliance. Gasps rippled through the audience as the footage showed Thompson forcibly arresting Carter without cause. "Officer Thompson," Carter's attorney began, You claimed Mr. Carter resisted arrest. Do you see any resistance in this footage? Thompson hesitated. His throat dry. Not exactly. The attorney pressed on. Yet you used unnecessary force and charged him falsely. Is this your idea of serving justice? I was just doing my job. Thompson stammered, his voice cracking. Carter himself took the stand. His voice calm but firm. He addressed not just the court but the wider audience watching the trial unfold on live broadcasts. This isn't just about my arrest. Carter began. It's about a system that has allowed officers like Jake Thompson to act with impunity for far too long. This courtroom represents a crossroads not just for this case, but for every individual who has been silenced, abused, or unjustly treated under the guise of law enforcement. His words resonated deeply, and the room hung on every syllable. Even the judge seemed visibly moved. Thompson's realization of his fate grew with each passing moment. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and Carter's testimony left no room for doubt. As the prosecution concluded, Thompson slumped in his chair. His confidence eroded. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder, the weight of public opinion pressing down on him like a tidal wave. After hours of deliberation, the judge returned with the verdict. The room fell silent as everyone leaned in, waiting for the words that would determine Thompson's future. Officer Jake Thompson, the judge began. The court finds you guilty on all counts, including abuse of power, false arrest, and misconduct. You are hereby barred from law enforcement and sentenced to 3 years of probation. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, some expressing relief, others applauding the decision. Thompson sat frozen, his face flushed with humiliation. His career was over, and his reputation lay in ruins. As Carter stood to leave, his eyes briefly met Thompson's. There was no anger, no triumph, only a calm resolve that spoke volumes. He adjusted his cuffs, nodded to his legal team, and exited the courtroom. Cameras outside captured his every step, and reporters clamored for a statement. Carter paused briefly, his voice steady as he spoke into the microphones. This is a victory not for me, but for justice. The work isn't done, but today, we've taken a step forward. Meanwhile, Thompson remained seated, staring blankly at the floor, the weight of his actions and their consequences pressing heavily upon him. Outside, the crowd celebrated a symbolic victory in the fight against systemic injustice. The verdict marked the beginning of Jake Thompson's fall from grace. His suspension was immediate, and within days, his name was plastered across every news channel and social media feed. Headlines labeled him as the disgraced cop whose actions sparked outrage across the nation. His face, once a symbol of authority, became a symbol of everything broken in the system he had served for 2 decades. Thompson's personal life unraveled just as swiftly. Friends distanced themselves. Colleagues avoided his calls. And even his own family struggled with the public backlash. Alone in his smoke-filled apartment, Thompson watched the news coverage in silence. Clips of his arrest video played repeatedly, each one chipping away at the image he had built of himself. This is politics, he muttered to the empty room. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. This was accountability long overdue. Meanwhile, James Carter returned to his work with the same calm resolve he had shown throughout the ordeal. At press conferences and public events, he refused to celebrate the verdict as a personal victory. Instead, he framed it as a win for justice. A step toward addressing the systemic failures that had plagued law enforcement for years. Justice isn't about one man, Carter stated in an interview. It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of their position, is above the law. The case sparked widespread calls for reform. Police departments across the country initiated internal reviews, and protests demanded greater transparency and accountability. For many, Thompson's downfall was a warning that the days of unchecked power were coming to an end. As Carter had said, this wasn't just a story about one officer's misconduct. It was about a system that was finally being forced to confront its flaws and change. The story of James Carter and Jake Thompson is more than just a tale of one officer's downfall. It's a reflection of the broader issues that plague our society. It's a reminder of the importance of integrity, justice, and equality in a system designed to serve and protect. Carter's calm resilience and unwavering commitment to truth served as a powerful contrast to the arrogance and prejudice that led to Thompson's undoing. This case revealed the cracks in a system that had long shielded misconduct, proving that no one is above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it. It also highlighted the power of accountability and the need for systemic reform to create a society where justice is truly blind and equitable. As we reflect on this story, we're reminded that while injustice may thrive in darkness, the truth always finds the light. Carter's victory was not just his own, it was a victory for everyone who believes in the power of justice to prevail. What do you think about this story? Does it inspire hope for change? Or do you think there's still a long way to go? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's continue this important conversation.